They say that in the depths of Moria, the fire never went out, that something ancient, even before Sauron, still breathes beneath the stones, silently watching the world. But what if I told you that the Balrog wasn't just a monster, that behind the flames and shadows there was a mind, a will, and that what happened on the bridge of Khazad-dûm was much more than a fight. It was the clash of two divine forces, Gandalf, the light-bearer, and Durin's Bane, the forgotten guardian of the world's secret. As Frodo carried the One Ring, unaware that its power awakened something dormant for millennia, the destiny of all Middle-earth began to be rewritten. Fire, sound, and silence reunited, and what was born from this encounter forever changed the history of the free peoples. Now tell me something. Where are you hearing this story from? And what time is it where you are? I like to imagine this circle of listeners scattered around the world, connected by the same mystery. And if you enjoy delving deep into these secrets of Middle-earth, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way, you help me continue bringing you stories that reveal what time has tried to hide. Beneath the weight of the mountains, where the sound of the surface is lost and light never reaches, there is a silence that breathes. It is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the kind of silence that carries memories too ancient to be remembered, echoes of a time when the world was still young and fire had a voice. There, in the bowels of Moria, the Balrog does not sleep. He observes. His consciousness wanders through the cracks in the rocks, feels the distant pulse of life, hears the sleeping music of creation that vibrates in the walls. For 5,000 years he has waited, motionless but awake, like a shadow lurking, patient and precise. For those who live through centuries, time is a calm river. For those born before the light, time is but a broken mirror. The Balrog knew this truth. While the surface, dwellers warred, forgot, loved, and died, he remained in the same spot, sustained by the conviction that the world would, at some point, call him back. Every vibration in the ground was a message. Every distant echo was a reminder of the power that once set skies and oceans ablaze under Morgoth's command. But that time passed, and the fire turned to embers. The mountains concealed it like a sacred secret. Moria, called Khazad-dûm by the dwarves, was not only a lost kingdom, but a prison and a temple. The Balrog knew this better than anyone. He sensed the deep notes of music of creation, the same force that shaped the first mountains and seas, still resonating beneath the stones. This invisible song was his connection to the past, a reminder that the force that formed him still existed, latent. And it was by listening to this music that he began to understand something that mortal peoples would never perceive. Power lies not only in the fire that destroys, but in the waiting that fuels it. There was a reason for his silence. The world above changed, but the underworld remained true to its origins. The roots of the mountains held stories that not even the Valar dared revisit. The Balrog became the guardian of these invisible ruins, not by choice, but by destiny. He watched the slow growth of civilizations as one observes a natural cycle, knowing that one day the noise of the living would echo above his head again. And when that happened, the balance would be broken, and the fire would need to be rekindled. The dwarves arrived, moved by the same silent voice that once created them. They believed they were following the call of the stone, but what guided them was older than instinct itself. The rock whispered promises of wealth, but the subsoil hid something deeper, a hidden truth that connected everything that exists, matter, sound, and destiny. And the Balrog understood this symmetry like no other. He saw no difference between the blows of a hammer and the beating of the world's heart. For him, everything was part of the same ancestral symphony. For the Balrog, solitude was not punishment, but a natural state. He didn't need company, only purpose. And that purpose lay in the vibrations that ran through the ground, signs that something above was in motion. Over the centuries, he learned to recognize the patterns, the cycles, the mentality of the peoples who dared to challenge the depths. Each civilization that rose and fell left traces in the sound of the earth, like notes repeating in an eternal melody. He fed on patience, not haste. He awaited the precise moment when harmony would be disrupted, when the world would once again need fire. Not a destructive fire, but a purifying one. The kind that consumes the old to make room for the new. And at the heart of this waiting lay a somber serenity, a kind of wisdom possessed only by the ancients, that all light, sooner or later, must pass through the shadows to be reborn. Therefore, even amidst the eternal cold of the stones, the Balrog did not see himself as a prisoner. He was part of the mountain itself, a sleeping consciousness within the structure of the world. When the dwarves descended into the depths, he felt them as one hears familiar footsteps. Each blow of their pickaxes echoed like a drumbeat in his light sleep. He knew they were not mere miners. They were messengers of the inevitable. This realization brought a mixture of fascination and melancholy. The Balrog knew that everything created one day calls back that which forged it. The dwarves sought Mithril, but they dug towards their own destiny. They believed they were gaining riches, but they were approaching the center of truth, and in doing so, awakening forces that should never be touched. There is a fine line between curiosity and damnation, and the story of Moria would prove it. For while the dwarves' torches illuminated the tunnels, in the shadows the Balrog saw the reflection of something much greater. Humanity and its thirst to go beyond what is permitted. And it was in this contrast, between light and darkness, between ambition and silence, that he understood that his time was drawing near again. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because beneath the mountains of Moria lay not just an ancient creature, but a consciousness that understood the structure of the world and knew how to use it. Most legends that have surfaced describe the Balrog as a beast, an irrational creature, born only to burn and destroy. But this is a mistake, a convenient mistake perhaps, created by those who prefer to imagine evil as something grotesque and distant, rather than something that thinks. The truth is that the Balrog was never just fire and shadow. It was mind, a mind shaped by Morgoth, the first Lord of Darkness, and trained to understand time as few beings in the world have been able to understand it. It did not act on instinct. It calculated, it observed, and it waited for 5,000 years while the world forgot his name. He studied. In the depths of Moria, among ancient columns and chambers of silence, the Balrog analyzed every vibration of the ground, every sound carried by the distant echo. He knew that the world above moved in cycles, rise, glory, fall. Civilizations rose with promise and crumbled with the same ambitions that had sustained them. He understood the pattern, and this awareness made him far more dangerous than any beast. His strength lay not in the flames, but in mentality. While dwarves prided themselves on their ingenuity and men lost themselves in wars of power, the Balrog thought in terms that transcended the haste of mortals. He did not see the ages as barriers, but as opportunities. He knew that time could be used as an ally, that waiting was not a sign of weakness, it was strategy. Patience was the invisible thread that connected all his decisions. There's something almost unsettling about imagining such a creature thinking. What goes on in the mind of a being who has seen his own creation born, who witnessed the seas forming, the first gods falling, and yet still kept his gaze fixed on the bowels of the world? He knew that acting too soon would mean ruin, so he remained motionless, but never inert. He observed the behavior of the races, their fears, their desires. He understood human and elven weaknesses, but it was among the dwarves that he found his best opportunity. The dwarves were predictable, driven by a hunger, disguised as purpose. They called it the quest for perfection, but the Balrog saw what lay beneath, an ancient yearning to master matter itself, to mold the world in its own image. He realized he could use this obsession, that all it would take was a small push, a subtle vibration in the stone, an imperceptible whisper in the mountain structure, to drive entire generations to dig deeper. And the deeper they dug, the closer they would get to him. This manipulation was almost artistic. The Balrog didn't force anything. There was no coercion, only influence. Like a strategist moving pieces on an invisible chessboard, he understood his opponent's behavior better than they understood themselves. He knew the breaking point of courage, the limit of faith, the temptation of greed. And little by little, he led them towards the destiny he had planned millennia ago. While free peoples debated wars and alliances, he saw life from a different perspective, as an experiment of energy and consequence. His reasoning transcended morality. He did not distinguish between good and evil. For the Balrog, there was only harmony or dissonance, and he was there to restore a different kind of balance, shaped by primordial fire. He believed that chaos was the true natural state of things, and that order, so celebrated by gods and elves, was merely a fragile illusion destined to shatter. This thought made him even more feared, a philosopher of the abyss. He didn't just want to destroy for pleasure, but to rebuild in his own way. He wanted to liberate the essence of the world from the form imposed by the Valar. That was the hidden truth. Behind its apparent inertia, the Balrog believed it was fulfilling a greater mission, that by waiting and acting at the right moment, it would be the instrument of ultimate transformation. For centuries, he had studied the dwarves as one observes a civilization in miniature. He knew their traditions, their music, their rituals, their cycles of succession. He observed how power corrupted even the noblest kings, how the repetition of the same decisions always led to the same end. He saw in the dwarves a metaphor for the world itself, a cog that turned in search of purpose, but which did not realize it was stuck on the same axis. And while they built palaces and excavated new halls, the Balrog understood the fragility behind each stone. But what made the Balrog truly terrifying was the awareness of its own role. It knew it was part of something greater, a fragment of an ancient rebellion that never ended, that Morgoth had been defeated, but his ideas, his intentions, and his essence continued to vibrate in the undercurrents of creation. It would be the flame that kept this legacy alive, even if silently, even if forgotten. And that's what few understand. The Balrog didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be unavoidable. He wanted the world to come to him, believing they had found a sleeping monster, when in reality, he had orchestrated his own awakening. Every crack in the rock, every new tunnel dug by the dwarves was part of a plan that completely surpassed them. This kind of thinking requires more than intelligence. It requires purpose, and that's where the difference lies between a monster and a mind. The Balrog didn't react to the world. It guided it step by step to the point where it could rewrite its own history. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what lay beneath Moria was not merely the echo of an ancient war, but the harbinger of a power capable of defying the very music of creation. They say the silence of the depths is absolute, but anyone who has lingered in Moria knows that this is not true. There is a sound down there, a sound that comes not from echoes or wind, but from the rock itself, a deep, constant murmur, like the heart of the world beating behind the stone walls. The dwarves called it underground song, or, among the oldest, the voice of the stone it was. more than a metaphor. For those who knew how to listen, that sound contained patterns, vibrations, rhythms that seemed to respond to the mind of the listener. And among all the beings that have ever inhabited the darkness, none understood that music like Balrog. He didn't just hear it, he mastered it. For him, sound wasn't simple vibration. It was living energy, the echo of music of creation. The same melody sung by Eru Ilúvatar and the Ainur when the world was still only thought. In the depths, this music did not cease. It only thickened, becoming part of matter, of iron, of granite, of mithril. The Balrog understood that every stone carries a note. Every mountain vibrates at a unique frequency, and that by manipulating these frequencies, he could alter the will of those who lived near them. That's how he began to guide the dwarves without ever being seen. No audible whisper, no physical presence, only the power of sound. A mineral whisper, slow and almost imperceptible, that touched the subconscious of each miner. At first, it seemed like just a natural instinct, the desire to dig deeper, to discover new riches, to surpass the limits that the ancient kings had set. But this impulse didn't come from them. It was an invisible influence, a vibration that passed through the ground and reached the heart. The Balrog understood the behavior of thinking creatures like few others. He knew that the most effective power is not that which imposes, but that which seduces. The song he projected was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the very sound of pickaxes in the tunnels. It blended with the rhythm of work, the prayers of the blacksmiths, the ancestral hymns of Durin. Gradually, the song of the Underdark became part of the dwarven culture, a kind of invisible soundtrack that fueled the pride and ambition of his race. The Balrog had learned to transform music into a tool of manipulation. There is something deeply symbolic in this. A being born from primordial fire, using sound, the gentlest of elements, to control an entire civilization. That is the true hidden truth from the history of Moria. The Balrog didn't awaken because the dwarves dug too deep. They dug too deep because he made them believe they needed to dig. And that difference changes everything. As generations passed, the dwarves felt the mountain calling to them. It was a mystical, irresistible call. They believed it was Khazad-dûm itself offering them its secrets, and in a way, they were right. But they didn't know that the melody came from a fiery mind hidden in the deepest layers of the rock. The Balrog was a maestro, and each hammer blow, each explosion of excavation, was part of its subterranean symphony. This manipulation had a purpose that went beyond curiosity or greed. The Balrog didn't just want to free himself. He wanted to understand the essence of music of creation. And for that, he needed the dwarves to clear a path for him to the mountain's energy core, where sound and matter merged into a single force. The vibrations of mithril, a rare and pure metal, acted as conductors of this energy, and the dwarves, unknowingly, were the musicians who tuned the instrument. The tragic beauty of this story lies in how evil acts when it is patient. The Balrog did not corrupt the dwarves through violence, but through inspiration. He gave them a new form of ambition, a new kind of faith. They built altars to work, believing they were serving a divine cause. And in a way, they were, but not the divinity they imagined. It was the ancient force of the earth, the echo of Morgoth, the primordial sound that taught the fire to move. There's something almost spiritual about this manipulation. The song of the underground didn't speak with words, but with sensations. It touched the instinct directly. It was emotional frequency. It was a sound that awakened in the dwarves the same impulse that an artist feels before unfinished perfection, or that a scientist feels when touching the limits of the unknown. It was the melody of eternal curiosity, and that is what makes this part of the story so profoundly human. The Balrog had understood what many kings and wizards never understood. that controlling the mind requires not strength but rhythm. When you control the rhythm, you control the desire, and when you control the desire, the rest follows. That is how he transformed entire generations of dwarves into instruments of his will. None of them realized how much. Their decisions, they were being shaped by something they had never seen before. The halls of Khazad-dûm vibrated with this invisible sound. The forged blades shone a little more intensely. The metals seemed more alive, and the air, in certain parts, trembled as if carrying a pulse. All this was the result of centuries of harmonic manipulation. The mountain itself had become a kind of harp, and the Balrog, the only one capable of playing its strings without being noticed. It's fascinating to think that the destruction of Moria began as a song, that the beginning of the ruin came disguised as inspiration. The boundary between creation and perdition is always subtle, and the Balrog knew that limit better than any other being. He knew that to lead a people to their downfall, all you have to do is make them believe they are rising. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the Song of the Underdark wasn't just a tool of manipulation. It was a living map, an ancient language, that pointed the way to the heart of the earth, where a power lay hidden that even the Balrog himself barely understood. For centuries, the dwarves believed they dug driven only by their own will. They swore that the sound of pickaxes echoing through the tunnels of Khazad-dûm was a reflection of their determination, their courage in facing the darkness in search of treasure and knowledge. But there was something more, something they could neither see nor name, a silent force that guided them, shaping their choices like an invisible sculptor-shaped stone. And at the center of this control was the Balrog, not the monster of legends, but the mind behind them. An ancient, patient strategist who understood the power of subtle deception better than any living creature. The Balrog didn't need to appear to be obeyed. He didn't shout orders. He didn't impose himself through fear. He whispered. And these whispers didn't come through words, but through sensations, impulses, intuitions, a slight shiver on the skin of a miner about to choose the path of the excavation, an unusual glint in a stone that seemed to promise wealth, a sequence of echoes that sounded like guidance. All of this was part of his manipulation, discreet, constant, effective. With each new tunnel opened, the dwarves drew a little closer to the heart of the world. They believed they were following the call of instinct, but what guided them was the reflection of a mind that operated on a level far beyond human. The Balrog understood the nature of the dwarves better than they understood themselves. He knew of their thirst for greatness, of the pride that made them want to go further than the ancient kings had gone. And he used this winning mentality as a tool, transforming ambition into a current. Nothing in his strategy was done by chance. He waited, observed, and at the right moment exerted subtle influences. Like a conductor leading a choir of blind musicians, he adjusted the rhythm and tone, ensuring that each hammer blow, each explosion, and each step echoed exactly in the direction he desired. The dwarves, without realizing it, became part of a symphony they hadn't chosen to play. And it is at this point that the story of Moria takes on an almost philosophical tone, because true power rarely manifests itself directly. Absolute dominion is not imposed by force, but by illusion of freedom. The Balrog dominated without ever needing to fight. He made the dwarves his unwitting allies, and the most impressive thing is that none of them suspected a thing. Perfect control is when the dominated believe they are in command. This type of manipulation goes beyond fantasy. It reveals something profound about the very nature of human decisions. How many times do we believe we are in control when in reality we are guided by invisible influences, by habits, fears, desires that someone or something has already learned to manipulate? The difference is that in Moria's case, this force was conscious. The Balrog was a student of the psyche, albeit in a dark way. He understood that the secret to shaping a mind lies not in breaking it, but in making it desire the same end as the manipulator. With each generation, the dwarves deepened their tunnels, believing they were expanding their empire. What they didn't realize was that each new cave opened was also a door being unlocked. Beneath the appearance of progress, a meticulously constructed plan, a map of energy, and power that only the Balrog could read. He transformed the underground into a labyrinth of purposes, where each gallery and each pillar formed part of a great invisible design, a diagram that would lead him to the center of the primordial force he sought. The manipulation was so refined that even the wisest dwarves began to feel the call as a divine revelation. Some claimed to hear the voice of the mountain. Others said they dreamed of lights that guided them. The Balrog, in silence, smiled. He didn't need to intervene directly. A small imbalance, a different vibration, was enough for the dwarves to believe they had had an idea. He made them think that each new discovery was the fruit of their own genius, when in reality they were only responding to the echo of an old command. The Balrog's genius lay in transforming deception into belief. He knew that all truth is shaped by repetition. The more times an idea is reinforced, the more real it becomes. And over the centuries he made the idea of digging deeper not just a desire, but a cultural necessity. The search for mithril ceased to be a job. It became a dogma. The dwarves became devotees of the very labyrinth that imprisoned them. This is one of the darkest and most fascinating revelations in history, the notion that absolute evil can act through habit. The Balrog no longer needed to manipulate consciously. Subsequent generations were born with the same impulse ingrained in their blood. Control had become tradition. It was the ultimate victory, dominion that survives even the absence of the dominator. There is a scene that ancient texts describe, albeit symbolically. They say that, at a certain point, the sounds of the excavations became so deep and constant that they echoed like songs. And the Balrog, listening from afar, believed he was witnessing an orchestra tailor-made for his awakening. Each blow on the stone was a note, each spark a flash of power. It was the harbinger of the liberation he had awaited for millennia. But there was something more in the subtext of this manipulation, a deeper layer of meaning. Because in leading the dwarves toward ruin, the Balrog wasn't just shaping their actions, it was testing the limits of creation itself. It wanted to prove that even beings made to create beauty could be used to dig their own destruction. That was its purpose. Hidden truth, the cruel philosophical experiment that underpinned his waiting. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because behind this invisible manipulation lies an even older purpose, a plan that involves not only control over the dwarves, but the awakening of something much greater, buried in the very foundations of the earth. In the heart of Moria, where the air is heavy and the silence seems alive, there is something the dwarves never fully understood. They believed they had chosen that place by chance, guided by the abundance of mithril and the stability of the rock. But there was something deeper, something that neither the oldest kings nor the sages of Khazad-dûm dared to name. Beneath the golden columns, between the chambers filled with mineral lights and subterranean rivers, pulsed a force that predated the world itself, the heart of Moria, the secret center of nexus of creation. That's where the notes of Song of Eru, the melody that shaped the universe, vibrated ever stronger. Every stone, every mineral, every breath of air contained an invisible score, a frequency that sustained the balance of reality. The dwarves, in their devotion to the stone, felt this energy without knowing how to name it. When they chanted their forging songs, when they shaped iron with almost divine precision, they were unconsciously repeating fragments of this primordial music. The sound of hammers in Moria was not merely work, it was an echo, a reflection of the sound that once created stars. But the Balrog knew. He understood that this point in the world was not a simple subterranean kingdom, but rather an energy portal, a point of convergence between matter and sound, between creation and will. That is why he remained there, hidden, motionless, waiting for the moment when harmony would become unbalanced. He did not want to destroy. He wanted to understand. He wanted to decipher the pattern that united all living and inanimate things, the secret language of the gods. This knowledge, he knew, would be the ultimate power, mastery over the very melody of existence. The dwarves believed they mastered the stones, but it was the stones that guided them. Each tunnel opened, each mine expanded, was part of an invisible design that converged on the same point, the vibrant center of Moria, where the forces of the universe intersected. Without realizing it, the dwarves transformed their excavations into a kind of continuous ritual. Their hands shaped the mountain, but their souls shaped reality. The Balrog merely observed, studying the decisions, which paths they took, the routes they chose, the mistakes they repeated. He saw the collective mind of that civilization as an organism, a chorus that responded in the same rhythm. This knowledge fascinated him. The Balrog, once a servant of Morgoth, had learned that true power lay not in destruction, but in the manipulation of harmony. Destroying the world would be easy, simply corrupting fire and sound. But understanding it, finding the hidden pattern behind each note of creation that required patience and perception. That's why he waited. That's why he allowed the dwarves to believe they were digging of their own accord. With each new blow, the mountain became more fragile, and the nexus more exposed. There is a dangerous beauty in this place. The chambers of Moria were not merely built, they were born, as if the rock itself wished to open. The dwarves called it the favor of the mountain, but the Balrog knew it was something deeper, the physical manifestation of the music that vibrated beneath his feet. At certain points, the air shimmered, and the sound of pickaxes created harmonic echoes that seemed to form ancient words, as if the world itself were responding. This was the forbidden beauty from the heart of Moria, a power that both enchanted and corrupted. The Valar had hidden these convergence points in inaccessible places, fearing that any mortal being would find them. They were places where reality became malleable, where thought could alter matter. The Balrog, who knew the ancient stories, understood that he was before one of these places. That is why he remained hidden, not out of fear, but out of strategy. He needed others to do the hard work, for the dwarves to break the magical seals without realizing it. And slowly, generation after generation, that is exactly what happened. With each new hall opened, a layer of divine protection crumbled. The Balrog could feel the energetic pulse growing, as if the world itself were beginning to breathe faster. The sound grew more intense, closer to a living chant. There were nights when the dwarves swore they heard melodies coming from the depths, sweet, hypnotic sounds that made them work tirelessly. They believed it was inspiration. It was called. The heart of Moria was more than a source of power. It was a breach, a window into the fabric of creation, and the Balrog, with its ancient wisdom, saw there the chance for something unprecedented, rewriting the laws of existence. He imagined what would happen if the melody were altered, if the frequency of creation were manipulated. He could reverse the flow of light, shape new worlds, create life from fire. But for that, the veil needed to be completely torn. While the dwarves gloried in their prosperity, Moria was already a spiritual time bomb about to explode. The notes of creation, once in perfect harmony, began to distort under the weight of greed and imbalance. The pure sound of the heart became a dissonant noise, and it was in this noise that the Balrog heard the signal he awaited. He felt the mountain tremble and knew that the time of observation had ended. It's curious to consider how the downfall of a people can begin with an excess of beauty. The dwarves sought perfection, and in doing so touched the divine. But the divine, when touched by impure hands, dissolves into chaos. Moria became the mirror of this paradox, a temple of light erected upon the abyss. And the Balrog, amidst the darkness, understood that it was about to witness something no mortal creature would ever comprehend, the moment when the music of creation would be corrupted from within. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what lay beneath the heart of Moria was not merely energy or power, but a forgotten memory of the gods, a fragment of the very sound that gave rise to existence. For ages, the dwarves believed that Moria's greatest treasure was mithril, the sacred metal, lighter than a feather and stronger than steel. But something lay hidden beneath layers of rock and ages of silence that none of them could have imagined. Something that did not belong to the physical world, but to the very fabric of creation. An artifact so ancient it predated the stars, and so powerful that the Valar buried it forever, fearing what might happen if anyone touched it again. It was the Fourth Silmaril, also known in Forbidden Whispers as the Cornerstone, the forgotten fragment of the original melody of Eru Ilúvatar. The three known Silmarils were created by Fëanor and fashioned from the pure light of the two trees of Valinor. But the Fourth Silmaril was different. It was not made. It was born. It was the primary spark of harmony, the seed of sound that gave rise to matter. While the other three held visible light, it contained the invisible sound, the divine compass that bound all that exists. The entire world vibrated at its frequency, and so the Valar chose to hide it, for they knew that in the wrong hands this primordial note could to rebuild the world or destroy it. Balrog discovered its existence through sound. He didn't find it by digging or exploring, but by listening. By deciphering the song of the underground, he perceived a recurring pattern, a sequence of vibrations that belonged neither to the rocks, nor to the fire, nor to the echo of the mines. It was something deeper, more ancient, a melody that came from within the planet itself, like a heart beating beneath the crust of the world. That is how he understood that Moria had been built upon the tomb of the impossible. For the Balrog, the Fourth Silmaril was not merely an artifact. It was the missing link between sound and power, between mind and matter. He believed that if he could touch it, he could remake the world according to his will, alter the flow of time, distort light, recreate the primordial fire from which he himself had been born. And the most ironic thing of all is that this ambition was not driven by hatred, but by curiosity. The Balrog wanted to understand what lay beyond the very limits of creation, like a divine scientist searching for the ultimate secret of the universe. But what fascinated him also consumed him. The Songstone was protected by a kind of living frequency, a sonic barrier that kept away any creature of corrupted nature. The Balrog, being a fallen Maya, felt this as a burning pain in his essence. Each time he approached, the melody made him recoil. It was as if the world itself was saying, "It's not for you." Still, he persisted, and each attempt made him more obsessed, more willing to defy the natural order of things. The dwarves, manipulated by him without their knowledge, were the instruments of this quest. They dug tirelessly, believing they were searching for new veins of mithril, when in truth they were forging a path to something that should never be found. With each blow of their pickaxes, the barrier protecting the Silmaril weakened. And as the sound of creation began to seep through the cracks in the rock, the balance of the world began to distort. The air of Moria grew denser, the fire more intense, the shadows deeper. It was as if reality itself began to writhe under the weight of what was about to be revealed. There are reports of dwarves who claim to hear voices in the stone, soft choruses, chants that seem to promise infinite wisdom. Some claim to have visions of cities made of light, of singing seas. Others went mad. The Balrog watched everything with fascination and disdain. He knew that only a being molded by primordial fire would be able to withstand the pure vibration of the Fourth Silmaril. He believed himself to be the chosen one, the only one capable of rewriting the score of the universe without being destroyed by it. And yet, there was something tragic about his quest. The Balrog believed he was acting as a creator, but deep down he was still a servant. Even freed from Morgoth, he still carried within him the mentality of one who obeys a greater force. His journey towards the Fourth Silmaril was not merely a quest for power, but a desperate attempt to break free from his own origins. He wanted to prove that he could be the author of a new chant, the first being to challenge the sound of Eru with a sound of his own. This is perhaps the most fascinating and symbolic part of this story, the desire of a creature created by music to try control the music. The Balrog was not driven solely by ambition. It represented the eternal struggle between creator and creation, between free will and destiny. It saw in the Songstone the chance to do what even Morgoth could not, to transform the universe into a mirror of one's own will. But there was a reason why the Fourth Silmaril had been forgotten. Its energy was too pure, too absolute. Any attempt to manipulate its frequency resulted in chaos. And that is exactly what began to happen. The mines of Moria began to emit sounds that no mortal ear could bear. The walls vibrated, the mithril turned to liquid, and the Balrog's fire reacted, as if being called back to its origin. The melody of the Songstone began to merge with his own being, and he understood too late that he was not about to master sound, but to be devoured by him. Still, the Balrog did not retreat, because there was something stronger than pain, the need to understand. He believed that if he could merge his essence with the power of the stone, he would become the first being to walk between worlds as a god of fire and sound. And it was this belief that kept him motionless, silent, waiting for the right moment to act. The world saw him as a sleeping shadow, but in truth, he was listening, trying to decipher the final chord of creation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what the Balrog truly awakened by touching the vibration of the Fourth Silmaril was not merely the echo of creation, but something even more dangerous. The reminder that every divine sound has its counterpoint, the silence that destroys it. There is a point in the depths of Moria where sound ceases to be music and becomes a murmur, where the stone no longer echoes, it answers. It was at this point, on the boundary between creation and oblivion, that the dwarves arrived when they dug too deep. They believed they were forging a path to the mithril, but they breached a much older boundary, a barrier built not by hands but by fear. Beneath the heart of the mountain, on a level that predates history itself, existed beings without form or name. Creatures, forgotten even by the gods. They were known only as nameless things, fragments of primordial chaos that survived the first light. It is said that when Eru Ilúvatar chanted the song of creation, not all the notes responded to the harmony. Some dissonances remained, hidden in the folds of time and space, rejected by the divine melody. These fragments, remnants of a universe that almost was, gathered in the world's fissures, places where the music ceased and silence became matter. There, beneath the roots of Arda, the nameless things waited. They did not sleep, they merely waited for someone to open the right door. And the dwarves, in their blind determination, opened up. The sound of the first pickaxe blow on the forbidden rock was like a bell ringing in the abyss. The echo travelled through tunnels that hadn't existed for millennia, crossed forgotten plains, and awakened something that should never have heard. Balrog felt the impact before anyone else. The vibrations shifted. The song of the earth, the sound, which had previously been orderly, now trembled in disjointed tones, like a melody being torn apart from within. He knew in that instant that the balance had been broken. Even for a creature like him, fear returned. For the nameless things were neither his allies nor his enemies. They were forces without purpose, without identity, without destiny. They were the echo of the chaos before creation, entities that not even Morgoth dared to awaken. The Balrog could master fire, shadow, and sound, but before them he was merely a dissonant note in a symphony he himself did not understand. Legend said that these creatures devoured light and sound, that they could not be seen, only felt. Wherever they passed, the air bent, time stretched, and even fire lost its brilliance. In the deepest tunnels, the dwarves began to disappear. First, the sounds ceased. No cries, no blows, only silence, and then emptiness. When other miners descended to investigate, they found only scattered tools and marks on the walls that seemed to move in the light. Dwarven runes began to warp, as if trying to escape something invisible. The elders of Moria, in despair, declared that the excavations should stop, but it was too late. The mountain had been wounded, and the wound began to bleed sound and shadow. The Balrog, upon perceiving the awakening of the nameless things, understood that its own presence was at risk. It was a creature of order within chaos, a fragment of controlled power. Forged in the fire of Morgoth, shaped to serve. The things, however, recognized no hierarchy. They were the pure chaos, and that made them unpredictable. Even he, a being of immeasurable power, felt small before what emerged from the deepest fissures. They did not communicate, they did not attack, they did not flee. They simply existed, and that existence was enough to corrupt everything around them. Vibrations began to shift throughout Moria. Sound ceased to obey the laws of physics. Echoes. Repeated words no one had spoken. The air seemed to breathe. The Balrog tried to understand the frequencies, but realized that each note emitted by the nameless things was a negation of music. They were the antonym of creation, the noise that remains when harmony dies. Even the Valar, watching from afar, dared not intervene, for they knew that interfering would be like poking the very heart of the universe, risking the ancient chaos spreading once more. The dwarves called the phenomenon the voice. Of the abyss, some began to worship her, believing her to be a new kind of deity. Others went mad. One miner was found with his eyes open and colorless, murmuring that he had seen the bottom of sound. The Balrog, for its part, remained hidden, but watched with fascination. He understood the danger, but also saw opportunity. If primordial chaos could be awakened, perhaps it could be controlled. And if he could control it, then he could shape sound and silence as tools. He could rewrite Eru's music from the inside out, but this thought came at a cost. For the more he tried to understand the nameless things, the more he felt they were watching him as well. The fire within him began to stir, trembling in rhythms that were not his own. Sometimes, while sleeping in the depths, he saw figures moving in the shadows, not complete forms, but silhouettes made of absence. They were like cracks in reality, points where the world seemed to dissolve. And the most unsettling thing of all was that he felt something familiar in them, as if chaos recognized him. The harmony that sustained the underworld began to crumble. The notes of creation, once organized, became jumbled, and the sound of Moria turned into a continuous lament. The Balrog realized he was losing control, and at the same time discovered a new form of power. The power of unpredictable chaos could not be tamed, but it could be summoned, channeled, transformed into brute force. This realization would be the seed of a dangerous transformation, something that would surpass the very limits of the Balrog's nature. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what awoke in the shadows of Moria was not merely forgotten chaos. It was the reflection of creation in its original state, before light, before sound, when even the gods feared silence. The end of Khazad-dûm did not begin with fire. It began with sound, a deep, vibrant, almost imperceptible sound, a note that pierced the mountain like a heart about to burst. The dwarves, blinded by the glory of their discovery, did not realize what they had touched. They were one step away from the impossible, and it was precisely that step that condemned them. The excavation reached its limit, the hammer struck the last seal, and the harmony of the subsoil that sustained the earth's balance shattered. What followed was more than destruction. It was the readjustment of the world itself. For millennia, the Balrog had awaited this moment. He needed not act, only observe. The dwarves had done everything according to his unseen plan. They had opened the right routes, broken the barriers, awakened the vibrational core of the heart of Moria. When the last fragment of stone fell, he felt the mountain breathe. And with that breath came something the Balrog himself feared, the return of primordial power, the forgotten flame that existed before time. The vibration that echoed that night was so intense that the runes engraved in the halls began to glow of their own, and the walls of the galleries seemed to pulse like living flesh. The dwarves, overcome by a mixture of ecstasy and fear, believed they had received the blessing of the gods. But what emerged from the depths was not light. It was a distorted reflection of it. Fire began to erupt from the cracks like hot blood, and a shadow took shape in the center of the main hall. It was Balrog, breaking free from the confinement in which he had chosen to wait. He did not awaken in fury, but with purpose. Each of his steps resounded like thunder, and the air around him ignited. This was not merely a creature, it was the materialization of consequence. The shock was instantaneous. The galleries that had once echoed with the sound of forges were now filled with screams and flashes of light. Fire coursed through the tunnels, as if it had a life of its own, pursuing the dwarves indiscriminately. It was as if the mountain itself had decided to devour its children. The torches went out, the thin air burned their lungs, and the ground vibrated with the weight of a presence that seemed larger than space itself. The dwarves called it divine punishment, believing that the Valar had turned against them. But what was happening there was not punishment. It was the closing of a cycle. The Balrog, amidst the smoke and chaos, understood that the precise point it had awaited for millennia had arrived. It did not roar, nor did it destroy impulsively. Every movement was calculated. It knew that the release of fire and shadow was not an end, but a transformation. The fire purified the old so that the new could be born. In his mind, he was not destroying Khazad-dûm. He was completing what the Song of Eru had begun, the return to the original chaos that precedes recreation. But not all chaos is creation. As the flames consumed the halls, something began to slip out of control. The mountain's notes, once regular, became dissonant. The nameless things, awakened in the abyss, began to react. They moved beneath the ground, drawn by the released energy, and the sound of the world shattered into 1,000 fragments. The Balrog, still immersed in its purpose, did not realize that it had overstepped the point of equilibrium. The harmony it had so desperately sought was crumbling before its eyes. The nexus of creation was disintegrating, and Moria was transforming into a funnel of irreconcilable forces, screaming light, burning shadow, destructive sound. There is a cruel irony in all of this. The dwarves always believed that stone was eternal, that the mountains would never fall. But every structure, however solid it may seem, carries within it the seed of change. And what the Balrog unleashed was precisely that, the inevitable transformation of something believed to be immutable. The golden pillars melted like wax, the bridges crumbled, and the halls echoed the last dwarven song, a desperate melody that mingled with the roar of the fire and was lost forever. Outside, the world saw only smoke rising from the mountains. Travelers spoke of a flash, an orange light that lasted for days, and then silence. Khazad-dûm had vanished. No army invaded, no god descended from the heavens. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the city. And for centuries, people believed the disaster was punishment, that the dwarves had defied the gods and paid the price. But the truth was more complex, darker, and older. What happened in the depths was not punishment. It was the final execution. Of a millennial plan, the Balrog had fulfilled its role as guardian of the lost melody. It had disrupted the balance of the world to make way for something new, something it didn't even understand. As the fire devoured the last hall, it felt the melody of creation vibrate within it. For the first time in ages, the sound was pure again. And in that instant, it realized the cycle was complete, but the price would be high. The fire retreated into the abyss, and silence returned to dominate the caverns. What remained was a distant echo, a low note that resonated eternally among the burnt stones. It was the sound of regret, of the belated realization that transformation always demands something in return. The Balrog had become what it had always feared, the destroyer of that which it loved to understand. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the fall of Khazad-dûm was not the end of a civilization, but the birth of a new kind of power, the power of conscious ruin, the point at which fire itself learns the price of shining too brightly. The destruction of Khazad-dûm did not end in the mountains. The sound of that catastrophe traveled far beyond the stones, crossing valleys and forests, reaching realms that had never seen the smoke of ruin. It was an echo that could not be heard with the ears, but with the soul. In LOTR, beneath the golden glow of the eternal leaves, Galadriel felt it first, not as a noise, but as a different silence, heavy, almost physical. The harmony of creation had changed its tone, and she knew what that meant. Something ancient, older than Sauron's own evil, had stirred. At that very moment, in Rivendell, Elrond looked up from the Book of Days and felt the same shiver. The waters of the Bruinen flowed faster, as if the river were responding to a hidden note in the air. He didn't know what had happened in Moria, but he understood that the vibration of the world had been stirred again. And, in the language of the elves, that was always a bad omen. It was as if the song of the earth had been interrupted and restarted at another rhythm, a rhythm no one knew. For the wise, this change was more dangerous than a war, because it was not a visible enemy, nor an army you could confront. It was an alteration in the very fabric of reality. Galadriel closed his eyes and saw in his mind the shadows rising through the cracks in the world. He felt the presence of fire and shadow moving towards the surface. The melody of creation, which had always been stable and predictable, was now marked by dissonant notes, the echo of a force that bowed neither to good nor evil, but to imbalance itself. Meanwhile, in distant lands, Gandalf walked under the grey sky and heard the wind carrying a broken melody. It was a faint sound, almost non-existent, but laden with a weight he recognized immediately. It was not the power of Sauron. It was something different, deeper. He knew instinctively that the evil growing beneath the mountains was not commanded. It was ancestral. It wasn't ambition. It was memory. And that troubled him more than any army of orcs. In the following days, the premonitions intensified. Reports began to emerge from regions near the Misty Mountains. Hunters spoke of sudden tremors, subterranean lights, and sounds that seemed to come from within the earth. The ground, they said, seemed to breathe. The elders of Rivendell called this the return of sound, an ancient legend about the awakening of the world's forgotten note, the fragment of the chant of Eru that had been corrupted at its origin. And if that fragment had begun to vibrate again, then everything was about to change. It was in this atmosphere of silent tension that the White Council was summoned. Elrond, Galadriel, Círdan, and Gandalf gathered, sensing the gravity of a matter they themselves could not name. The air in the room seemed heavier, and the candles fluttered even without wind. When Gandalf spoke, his voice was lower than usual. Something has awakened beneath the mountains, and it is not Sauron. None of them doubted. They knew that Sauron's evil was powerful, but understandable. A mind with purpose, a structure of dominion. What was emerging now, however, was unintentional. It was like an open wound in the body of the world. Galadriel described what he had felt, a constant vibration, as if light itself were being compressed. He said that on the quietest nights, he could hear a distant sound, like a shapeless chorus echoing through the roots of the earth. Elrond added that the stars above the Misty Mountains seemed to shift slightly, as if their light were being diverted. It was the kind of phenomenon that not even the Valar would dare ignore. Gandalf remained silent for a time, and then, with a distant gaze, said only, "If the balance of creation has been disturbed, there is no safe boundary." What none of them knew yet was that this imbalance was no accident. It was part of something much larger, an unfolding of the same plan that had led the Balrog to wait for ages. Fire and shadow did not act alone. They were catalysts, instruments of a transformation that encompassed all of Arda. What began in Moria was expanding, slowly, like the sound of a discordant string spreading throughout the instrument. From that moment on, the wise men became guardians of the unseen. Each, in their own way, began to observe the signs of the world with heightened attention. Galadriel consulted the waters of her mirror. Elrond sought answers in ancient songs of the Noldor, and Gandalf began his journey towards the mountains, driven not by curiosity, but by feeling. Something in his heart told him that beneath the ruins of Moria lay more than fire and ruin. There was a truth that connected the past to the origin of all things. Time began to distort around these events. The air seemed to carry memories, and the earth a kind of deep melancholy. The destruction of Khazad-dûm had left an invisible scar on history, a wrong note that would never return to its original tone. And the wise knew that when the music of the world changes, everything changes with it. Plants grow differently, rivers follow other paths. The winds bring new messages. What the elves called imbalance, men would describe as destiny. It was as if the world were preparing for a new chord, an inevitable turning point, the kind of transformation that cannot be contained, only understood. And that is what made Galadriel's fear and Gandalf's unease so intense. They knew that certain forces, once awakened, do not sleep again. Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter, because what the White Council was beginning to realize was only the surface of what had truly happened. Beneath the mountains, what awoke was not just a being, but a living memory of the first sound, and that memory was beginning, little by little, to rewrite the destiny of all Middle-earth. In the darkness of Moria, The sound of the Fellowship's footsteps echoed like ancient memories. The air was thick, saturated with a silence that seemed to observe. The walls, still marked by the ancient fire, guarded a secret that did not sleep. It only waited. Frodo, with the One Ring fastened to his chest, did not know that he carried the key to something far greater than the mission to destroy Sauron. The cold gold of the ring pulsed softly, as if recognizing the place. Each beat of his heart was answered by a distant vibration, coming from the depths. What no one realized was that the power of the ring was singing, and its music echoed toward the Fourth Silmaril, the cornerstone, the same artifact that the Balrog had been searching for millennia. The resonance between these two forces awakened something that slept beneath layers of shadow and fire. The ring and the Silmaril vibrated in unison, like two notes of a lost melody, and this forbidden harmony pierced the veil of time. The Balrog felt it. He needed neither to see nor to hear. He felt in the bowels of the world the call that had awaited him since the beginning of time. An invisible current coursed through the galleries, rekindling forgotten embers and reanimating the fire within him. The shadows rose like dancing veils, and the heat of the abyss spread across Moria like the breath of an ancient dragon. The dwarves had called this creature Durin's Bane, the Bane of Durin. But what now walked was no longer merely a vengeful shadow. The Balrog was the ultimate instrument of dissonance, the point where the song of creation and the echo of corruption met. It advanced not out of hatred, but out of destiny. Its presence made the ground tremble and the air vibrate, and each step was a reminder of what the world had forgotten, that all light carries within it the possibility of its fall. Gandalf was the first to sense the change. Still on the ancient staircases, as the group fled from the orcs, he realized that the sound of fire in the galleries was not that of a simple blaze. It was the sound of an awakened mind. The wizard paused for a moment, and something in his gaze faded. He knew what was coming. That force was all too familiar. It was the same kind of power he himself carried in essence, the sacred fire of a Maya, but there distorted, corrupted, transformed into destruction. He understood that the approaching confrontation would not be between good and evil, but between two divine wills trying to protect opposing versions of the same. Secret, the group rushed across the ancient bridges of Khazad-dûm, and behind them the roar grew louder. Fire illuminated the golden arches, and the columns cast shadows of an army that no longer existed. When the Balrog emerged from the darkness, it was as if time had turned back. Its form was immense, enveloped in fire and smoke, with eyes like slits of glowing coal. Its presence was not merely physical, it was metaphysics. The surrounding space distorted, the stones vibrated like strings, and even the light of the torches seemed to recede. Fearing to be consumed, Gandalf raised his staff, and in that instant, two worlds collided. The wizard, bearer of the flame of Anor, the light of the eternal sun, and the Balrog, guardian of the primordial fire, shaped by Morgoth in the first days. What followed was not merely a fight. It was a conversation between cosmic forces, waged in silence, at frequencies that only the universe could hear. The air split in waves of energy, and each blow reverberated like thunder in the soul of the mountain. The bridge trembled beneath their feet, not only from the weight, but from the tension between the forces vying for the same space of existence. Frodo looked back and saw the fire engulfing the wizard like a miniature sunrise, and then the cry, "You shall not pass." But those words were more than a challenge, they were a decree. Gandalf wasn't just stopping the Balrog's advance, he was interrupting the music. The bridge of Khazad-dûm was a line of power, a structure built upon the echo of the song of creation. When Gandalf struck the stone with his staff and it split, the sound that echoed was not one of destruction, but of disconnection. He severed the invisible cords that connected the Balrog to the physical world, isolating it from the flow of the original harmony. The fall was inevitable. The Balrog plummeted, dragging the wizard with it. But what few understood was that, at that instant, something greater was happening. By breaking the bridge, Gandalf redefined reality. The breaking of the stones was symbolic. It was the closing of the rift opened since the awakening of the hidden Silmaril. The disordered notes of creation began to recompose themselves. The chaos was receding, and the dissonant echo that had spread since the fall of Moria began to silence. As they both fell, fire and light intertwined. The depths vibrated like a convulsing heart. The mountain seemed to breathe again, and the sound of the world resumed its rhythm. The Balrog roared not in pain, but in rage, at understanding that it had been defeated not by strength, but by balance. Gandalf, on the other hand, plunged into the abyss as one fulfilling an oath. Each layer he traversed was a reminder of the original music, and he knew that in the end he would not fall, would reignite. When the fire died down, Moria fell silent. A pure, clean, almost sacred silence. The bridge was destroyed, but the world was saved from further discord. The Fourth Silmaril, isolated once more in its chamber of light, returned to its rest. No living creature would ever see it again, and yet its vibration would remain there, silent, pulsing beneath the stone, a reminder that creation is fragile, and that even the most beautiful sound can become noise if its origin is forgotten. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Gandalf's sacrifice wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the reconciliation between shadow and light, the moment when the universe remembered itself. And it is at this point between the fall and the rise that the true meaning of salvation begins to reveal itself. Funny how certain stories seem to find us at the right moment, isn't it? If you've made it this far, it means that some part of this journey between fire and light has also spoken to you, perhaps a symbol, a memory, or just that feeling of being in the presence of something greater than words. This channel exists precisely for that reason. 2. Revisit the mystery, the hidden meaning behind the myths, and the truths that still echo in the subtext of Middle-earth. So, if this kind of journey makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel to continue walking with me through these old stories that still teach us so much about the present. And feel free to leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like to imagine this invisible map of voices scattered around the world, all connected by the same curiosity. Oh, and if this video made you think, feel, or simply forget about time for a few minutes, leave a like. It helps more than you can imagine and shows that this type of content still has room to grow. There's a video over here that complements this journey. Click on it and continue with me there. The next story awaits you.